Alright, so what we got here is 1987, right?
Yes.
Jeep Grand Cherokee. What I consider your typical LS conversion. That's why when a client calls up and says, I got a vehicle that's been converted, I got this problem, that problem. This vehicle is a prime example of why I run. I mean run. So, longtime client of ours, their son, he had this converted, said he was having electrical issues. The whole ECM and wiring harness was underneath the carpet. Just tucked under the carpet. The fuse box that came with the kit that he bought, the wiring harness, wrapped up in a big circle underneath the carpet, vibrating, and they actually had people riding in the passenger seat with their feet on top of the wiring harness, fuse box, ECM. Couldn't figure out why it was blowing fuses. Alright, so took it out of there. Found a kit that mounts it where it should be mounted in the engine compartment, like GM. The 2006 GMC 5.3 conversion. So here's your fuse box, here's your ECM, everything's wired, tied in. The battery connections was just a bunch of wires stabbed into the battery. Nothing had a proper ground or a proper hot feed. We put a hot junction over here right on the firewall so we could run all of our hot feeds off of it, tap into it with proper inline fuses so everything was protected. Everything that they had from the conversion, nothing was fuse protected. I mean, absolutely nothing. It was a fire just waiting to happen. None of the vacuum lines for the heater was hooked up. That was on the client's list of complaints. Their heater didn't work, cruise didn't work. What else didn't work? Wipers.
The light, all horn. I mean, everything. Nothing was working.
Nothing worked. The heater didn't switch from defrost to vent to floor. Nothing. Blower resistor was, of course, melted. So we put a block on the back of the firewall, as you can see, tapped into the main engine vacuum, fed the heater control system the proper amount of vacuum, got all that working, made sure that the alternator had the proper ground. When you do these LS conversions, routing of the wiring harness is very important. If you run the alternator wiring or the computer wiring anywhere near the ignition coil, you're going to get interference in the communication lines. It's going to drive the ECM, it's going to drive it nuts. And that's exactly what we had going on here. And multiple codes for map sensor, all kinds of stuff, and it just came down to the way the engine harness was just laid in there on top of everything. So we rerouted everything, double insulated the wiring harness so it wouldn't pick up any interference from the ignition coils. Got that all taken care of, got it to run. The client also stated they had already been through 2 or 3 different transmissions. 5.3 with a 4L80 transmission. Anybody that knows anything about the 4L80 knows that it has an input and output speed sensor, and the computer uses the input speed and output speed sensors to calibrate the shift point so it knows how fast it's going. They weren't even hooked up. The pigtails weren't even plugged into the transmission. How it was even shifting I haven't even figured that out. I guess I'd have to call a GM engineer to find that out because it wasn't even hooked up. So we had to buy a conversion kit that luckily they had, so we could wire in the vehicle speed, input and output, so you'd have all 4 gears plus lockup, which it now does have. Got the transmission working. Cruise control, was able to tap that into the factory wiring. We used the factory side, the factory Jeep switch, tapped it into the GM wiring. You know, that had to be tapped into the brake switch. All of it was done properly. There was no check engine light in the vehicle, so the client would have no idea if there was an issue. Not that they have all the sensors hooked up, because of course, you know, this vehicle, being it's below 95, isn't required to have cats, so it doesn't have the downstream O2s, and that's been bypassed. So we installed check engine light, that check engine light here, put a new cruise control switch in it, got all that working. These older Jeeps have actually 2 systems, one for the heating, one for the cooling, with 2 different blower motors. The heater box is completely destroyed, cracked, sucking air from the outside, sucking gas fumes from the engine compartment, putting it into the cab of the vehicle, which this particular client has kids, so that was a no-no. We took the heater box out, basically glued it back together because they're no longer available. Put insulated mat all inside the plastic box to keep it nice and sealed, so it suck just where it's supposed to suck, not from the engine compartment. With the vacuum lines properly hooked up, you got the frost, floor, vent. Then you run into another situation. You know, the computer wants to see the high side and low side of the computer or of the air conditioner. So it knows when to turn the compressor on, when to turn the cooling fan on, when to shut the compressor off, because the head pressure's too high or the low side's too low. So we took all that wiring and we tapped it all into the vehicle's AC. So now everything's working. Put the required relays in. Cooling fan comes on with the AC. The computer can see the high side and low side pressure switches. It works like it did, as it was designed to do from GM. You got the horn working. All the lights are working. Anything else I missed?
And when it came in, it didn't have neutral safety switch, so it basically in drive, reverse, whatever gear you had it on, you could start it up and it would start up and run. So we had to get an aftermarket system on that for the linkage to work. So we got that all wired in, so that's when it starts in parking neutral now.
Which is, you know, I never know when you got kids in the car playing around. Maybe they accidentally start the car and the car starts moving. Went ahead, since this is now what you consider a sought after vehicle, customers have, you know, the clients have a lot of money in it, obviously. Installed an alarm system. It's got power locks, remote start, all the bells and whistles, so they can have their heater on, start it up, be nice and warm when they go out. Basically, the whole purpose of this video, somebody out there is going to recognize this Jeep. They're going to recognize that they were the one that did the conversion. And all I have to say to them is, this is a perfect example of why most of your public thinks mechanics or technicians or shops are rip-offs. because this vehicle was sent out to a very young couple with kids that, in my opinion, was very unsafe. Exhaust fumes, transmission's not hooked up properly, nothing fused in the electrical system, everything just tapped on the hot feeds and ignition feeds. Absolutely no electrical protection whatsoever. And the clients, they didn't know. All they knew is it started, it ran, and they were blowing a lot of fuses. I consider them to be lucky. Long-term project, and we most likely will never be doing one again. I think I touched on everything, right? Started a